The sky above Kasan burned red with falling ash and alien spores. Ambassador Lyra Veltar pressed her long, pale fingers against the communication console, watching the status lights blink from green to amber to red. One by one, the defensive stations around her homeworld went silent. Still no response from the Zephyrian Empire, reported her aide, his voice shaking. The Crystalline Consortium has not answered our calls. The hegemony remains silent. Lyra closed her eyes for a moment. 3 days ago, the Dracoth swarm had appeared at the edge of their system like a plague of locusts made from metal and flesh. These creatures had already consumed 7 Volari colonies, stripping entire worlds down to bare rock. Now they circled Kasan like hungry predators, preparing for their final feast. The Volari had sent distress signals across the galaxy. They had begged every major civilization for help. The message was simple: help us, or watch another species die. The galaxy had chosen to watch. Through the tall windows of the communications center, Lyra could see the capital city burning. Dracoth bioships hung in the atmosphere like dark clouds, dropping their spawn pods onto the streets below. Each pod split open to release creatures that looked like a nightmare fusion of insect and machine. They moved with perfect coordination, consuming everything in their path. "Ambassador," her aide whispered, "the defense grid is failing. General Torval estimates we have maybe 6 hours before the city falls." Lyra nodded but did not turn away from her console. She kept sending the same message over and over. "This is Ambassador Lyra Veltar of the Volari Republic. Our world is dying. Please help us. Anyone who can hear this, please help us." The response was always the same crushing silence. The Zephyrian Empire was the strongest military force in the galaxy. Their fleets could have swept the Dracoth away like dust. But the Zephyrians worried about their own borders and had no interest in helping a small species on the outer rim. The Crystalline Consortium possessed technology that could have stopped the invasion in minutes. But they were traders, not warriors, and the Volari had little to offer in return for such expensive help. The hegemony of Arcturus had ships, weapons, and soldiers, but they calculated that helping the Volari would cost more than the benefit they would gain. So they stayed home and watched from afar. "Ma'am," her aide said softly, "perhaps we should evacuate to the deep shelters." "No," Lyra replied. "If this is where our people make their final stand, then this is where I will stand with them." She looked at her console again. The communication array was running on emergency power now. Soon, even that would fail, and the Volari would face their end in total silence. Then something impossible happened. A new signal appeared on her screen. It was weak, coming from the very edge of the galaxy, but it was real. Someone was responding. "This is Captain Dong Min of the Terran vessel Soul's Pride. We heard your call, Ambassador. We're coming." Lyra stared at the display. Terran. She knew that name from the Galactic databases, but only barely. Earth was a small world on the outer rim, inhabited by a young species that had only joined the Galactic community 50 years ago. Most civilizations barely acknowledged they existed. "Sir," her aide looked confused, "are you sure about this? The humans are... well, they're not exactly a major power. They have maybe a few dozen ships total." Lyra called up Earth's file on her screen. "The humans had no energy shields like the Zephyrians. Their weapons were primitive compared to crystalline technology. Their ships were built from basic metals and alloys, not the advanced materials other species used." By every measure that mattered in galactic politics, they were weak, but they were coming. "Please respond, Ambassador," came Captain Dong Min's voice again. "We need to know your situation." Lyra's hands trembled as she activated the response channel. "Captain Dongmin, this is Ambassador Veltar. We are under attack by the Dracoth swarm. They have overwhelmed our defenses. I estimate our world has less than 6 hours before it falls." "Understood, Ambassador. Can you send us tactical data on the enemy forces?" Lyra looked at her aide, who quickly transmitted everything they had. The data painted a grim picture. Over 300 Dracoth bioships in orbit, thousands of ground forces already deployed, and more swarm units arriving every hour. There was a long pause before Captain Dong Min responded. "Ambassador, we won't lie to you. This looks bad. Really bad. But we're still coming. Can you hold out for 3 days?" 3 days. Lyra looked around the communications center. Half the stations were dead now, and she could hear explosions getting closer. Outside, Dracoth creatures were moving through the streets, their chittering calls echoing off the burning buildings. "Captain," she said quietly, "why are you doing this? Your government cannot have ordered this. You barely know us." Another pause. When Dong Min spoke again, his voice was steady and sure. "Because you asked for help, Ambassador, and someone has to answer." Lyra felt something she had not felt in days. Hope. It was a small hope, fragile as a candle flame in a storm. These humans were rushing across the galaxy to help a people they barely knew, with ships that were probably no match for the Dracoth. It made no sense by any logical calculation, but they were coming. "Captain," she said, "we will hold as long as we can." "Good. And Ambassador, start preparing your people for a counterattack." A counterattack? Lyra could hardly believe what she was hearing. "Captain, the Dracoth have consumed dozens of worlds. Their forces number in the thousands." "I know," Dong Min replied. "But my people have a saying, the bigger they are, the harder they fall. See you in 3 days, Ambassador. Soul's Pride out." The communication channel went silent, but this time the silence felt different. It was not the silence of abandonment, but the silence before a storm. Lyra turned to her aide. "Get me General Torval. Tell him we need to hold for 3 days. Tell him help is coming." "What help, ma'am? A few human ships against the entire Dracoth swarm?" Lyra looked out the window at her burning world, then back at the communication console where a small blue dot marked Earth's location on the galactic map. It was so far away, so small compared to the great powers that had ignored their pleas. But sometimes, she thought, the smallest light shines brightest in the darkest hour. "Tell the General," she said, "that sometimes help comes from the most unexpected places." 3 days had passed like 3 years. Ambassador Lyra Veltar stood in what remained of the command center, watching through cracked windows as Dracoth forces massed for their final assault. The creatures had taken most of the city now, their biomechanical forms scuttling through the rubble-filled streets like giant insects. General Torval limped over to her, his left arm in a makeshift sling. "Ambassador, they're preparing for the final push. My soldiers are brave, but we're down to our last ammunition reserves. I'm not sure we can hold for another hour." Lyra nodded, her eyes fixed on the tactical display. Red dots representing Dracoth forces covered the map like a rash. The green dots marking Valari defensive positions had shrunk to a tiny cluster around the government district. Any word from your human friends? The general asked. Before Lyra could answer, her aide called out from across the room. Ambassador, something's happening in orbit! Lyra rushed to the communication console. On the screen, she could see space beginning to ripple and bend. Then, like flowers blooming in the darkness, ships began to appear, but these were not the sleek, beautiful vessels of the major galactic powers. These ships looked like they had been built in a hurry and used hard. Their hulls were scarred and patched. Some had extra armor welded on in places that suggested recent battles. They were angular and practical, with none of the artistic curves that other species favored. 17 ships, her aide reported, counting as more vessels dropped, out of hyperspace. 5 destroyers, 8 frigates, 3 cruisers, and 1, oh my, the last ship to appear was massive. It dwarfed the others, its dark hull bristling with weapon ports and sensor arrays. This was clearly their flagship, and it looked like it could take on half the Dracoth fleet by itself. This is Captain Dong Min of the Terran vessel Soul's Pride. To Ambassador Veltar. Sorry we're a bit late. Traffic was murder getting here. Despite everything, Lyra almost smiled. Captain, you have no idea how good it is to see you. The feeling's mutual, Ambassador. We're looking at the tactical situation. Now, my people are pretty good at math, and frankly, the numbers look terrible. On her screen, Lyra could see the human fleet spreading out into formation. They moved with surprising speed and coordination, each ship taking up precise positions around. The planet! Captain, she said, the Dracoth have over 300 ships in orbit alone. You're outnumbered almost 20 to 1. Yeah, we noticed that, came a new voice. This is Commander Hye Jin, tactical officer. We've been studying the Dracoth on our way here. They fight like a hive mind, which means they're predictable once you figure out their patterns. Lyra watched in amazement as the human ships suddenly accelerated toward the Dracoth fleet. This was not how space battles were supposed to work. According to every military manual in the galaxy, the humans should have taken defensive positions and tried to pick off enemy ships from long range. Instead, they dove straight into the Dracoth formation like angry hornets. What are they doing? General Torval muttered. They found out quickly. The human ships were fast and maneuverable in ways that seemed to defy physics. They darted between the larger Dracoth bioships, concentrating their fire on specific targets before spinning away to attack others. Lieutenant Jae-Won's fighter squadron burst from the belly of one of the cruisers like a swarm of metal wasps. The small craft were impossibly agile, weaving through Dracoth defensive fire and striking at weak points that no one else had even noticed. How did they know to target those nodes? Lyra whispered, watching as Dracoth bioships began to lose. Coordination and drift aimlessly. Because we've been watching and learning, came another voice over the communication channel. This is Engineer Su Min. We studied every battle recording we could find. The Dracoth aren't invincible. They just fight differently than everyone else expects. The space battle was unlike anything Lyra had ever seen. The humans didn't try to match the Dracoth in raw firepower. Instead, they used speed, surprise, and what could only be called creative tactics. When Dracoth reinforcements arrived from the outer system, Commander Hye Jin split her forces into 3 groups that attacked from completely different angles. When the enemy tried to surround the human flagship, Captain Dong Min led them on a chase through Kesan's asteroid belt, using the rocks as cover and weapons. But the real surprise came when the human ground forces arrived. Ambassador! Captain Dong Min's voice crackled over the communication system. We're sending down support troops, but we're not going to land them at your position. What do you mean? Lyra asked. We're dropping them right on top of the Draketh landing zones. Lyra and General Torval stared at each other. Captain, the general said, that's suicide. You'll be completely outnumbered and surrounded. Yeah, probably, came a cheerful voice. This is Sergeant Tae-hyun, Marine Commander. Don't worry about us, General. We specialize in impossible situations. Through the command center's damaged windows, they watched as human drop pods fell from the sky like meteors. Instead of landing safely behind defensive lines, the pods smashed down right in the middle of Draketh positions. What followed was the most intense urban fighting Lyra had ever witnessed. The humans didn't try to hold territory or establish defensive lines. Instead, they turned the invasion into a chaotic street fight, forcing the Draketh to engage in exactly the kind of combat they were worst at. Sergeant Tae-hyun's Marines moved through the city in small groups, appearing suddenly to attack Draketh formations before vanishing into the rubble. They used the ruins as weapons, collapsing buildings on enemy forces and turning every street corner into an ambush point. They're insane, General Torval said, but he was smiling as he said it. Engineer Sumin worked with Valari technicians to rapidly build new defensive positions using human techniques that broke every engineering rule but somehow held together. Lieutenant Yuna coordinated airstrikes that hit Draketh forces with pinpoint accuracy, even in the middle of running battles. But what impressed Lyra most was not their tactics or their technology. It was their attitude. Soul's pride to all. Units! Captain Dongmin's voice came over the communication system. Remember, people, we're not here to die heroically. We're here to win and go home. So let's make this quick and clean. Copy that, Captain, came Sergeant Tae-hyun's voice from somewhere in the burning city. These bugs picked the wrong planet to mess with. The human Marines laughed and cheered over the communication channel as they fought. They joked with each other even while bullets and plasma bolts flew around them. They acted like this was just another day at the office, not a desperate battle for survival. Within 6 hours, the situation had completely changed. The Draketh forces that had been preparing for a final victory were now scattered and confused. Their coordinated assault had turned into a series of small, desperate fights that they were losing badly. Ambassador, Captain Dongmin called. We've secured the immediate area around your position, but this is just the beginning. What do you mean? I mean, we're not going to sit here and wait for more Draketh to show up. We're going to end this threat once and for all. Lyra felt a chill run down her spine. Captain, the Draketh control dozens of star systems. Their fleets number in the thousands. I know, Dongmin replied calmly. That's why we're going to hit them where they live. General Torval shook his head in disbelief. These humans are either the bravest people in the galaxy or the craziest. Lyra watched through the window as human Marines helped Valari civilians out of the rubble. She saw Sergeant Tae-hyun personally carrying an injured Valari child to safety, his armor scorched and dented from the fighting. Maybe, she said softly, there's no difference. The war room aboard the Soul's Pride was crowded with both human and Valari officers. Ambassador Lyra Veltar found herself sitting next to Captain Dongmin, staring at a three-dimensional map of the galaxy that showed the full scope of the Draketh threat. Red zones marked conquered systems. Yellow zones showed worlds under attack. The pattern was clear and terrifying. The Draketh were consuming everything in their path, moving steadily toward the galaxy's core where the major civilizations lived. 57 systems, reported intelligence specialist So Young, her young, face serious as she highlighted each red zone. That's what the Draketh have taken in the last 2 years, and they're accelerating. We estimate they'll reach Zephyrian space within 6 months. General Torval, his arm still in a sling from the battle, shook his head. Maybe then the great powers will finally act. It'll be too late by then, Commander Haya-Jin said flatly. Look at these numbers. Every system the Draketh take makes them stronger. They consume the planets and turn the biomass into more ships, more warriors. By the time they reach the core worlds, they'll be unstoppable. Lyra studied the tactical display. So what do you propose? You have 17 ships. The Draketh have thousands. Captain Dongmin leaned forward, his eyes fixed on the map. We've been thinking about this problem all wrong. Everyone looks at the Draketh and sees an unstoppable swarm. But that's not what they really are. Lieutenant Yuna touched a control and the display changed. Now it showed communication lines connecting the various Draketh fleets like a web of light stretching across space. The Draketh aren't just a hive mind, she explained. They're dependent on central command nodes. Every fleet, every group of ground forces, they all report back to coordination centers. Take out the right nodes, and entire fleets become lost, confused, directionless. Lyra felt a chill. You're talking about attacking their command structure directly. That's exactly what we're talking about, Dongmin replied. Intelligence specialist So Young has identified the primary command cluster. It's deep in Draketh space, 17 systems from here. So Young highlighted a region of the map that pulsed with angry red light. This is it. Based on communication intercepts and movement patterns, we believe the main Draketh leadership is here. If we can take out this cluster, the entire swarm network will collapse. General Torval stared at the display. You want to fly 17 ships through 17 systems of enemy territory to attack their most heavily defended position. That's not a plan. That's suicide. Maybe, Engineer Su-min said with a slight smile. But it's the kind of suicide that might actually work. Lyra looked around the room at the human faces. They were all young, she realized. Most of them were probably in their 20s or early 30s. In Valari society, such young people would never be trusted with important decisions. But these humans carried themselves with a confidence that came from experience. How? She asked quietly. Commander He-jin activated a different display. The Draketh think like a hive mind. They're incredibly good at coordinating large-scale attacks, but they're terrible at dealing with unexpected tactics. They expect enemies to behave logically, to retreat when outnumbered, to defend when attacked. We don't do any of those things. Sergeant Tae-hyun added from his position near the back of the room. His Marines had cleaned up since the battle, but Lyra could still see the marks of recent combat on their faces. Lieutenant Jae-won stepped forward. Our fighter pilots have been analyzing Draketh formations. They have blind spots, weaknesses. Most species never exploit them because they're afraid to get close enough. We're not most species, Captain Dongmin said simply. The plan they outlined was brilliant and terrifying in equal measure. The human fleet would split into 3 groups. One would remain at Kasan to continue defending against any Draketh counterattacks. The other 2 would launch simultaneous deep strike missions into enemy territory. The first group would hit Draketh supply lines, destroying the biofactories that created new ships and warriors. The second group, led by Captain Dongmin himself, would punch straight through to the command cluster. It's impossible, General Torval said. You'll be facing odds of 1,000 to 1. We've faced worse, Dongmin replied. Lyra stared at him. When? When have you faced worse than this? The captain was quiet for a moment. Then he said, 3 years ago, pirates attacked one of our colony worlds, The local government asked for help from the hegemony, the consortium, anyone who would listen. Nobody came. So we went instead. 12 ships against a fleet of 50. What happened? We won. His voice was matter-of-fact, as if he was discussing the weather. The pirates weren't expecting us to fight the way we did. They were expecting a traditional fleet engagement. Instead, we turned it into chaos. Lieutenant Yuna called up another display. The key is speed and unpredictability. We hit them where they don't expect it, when they don't expect it. We make them react to us instead of the other way around. Lyra looked at the tactical plan again. Even if it worked perfectly, the human losses would be enormous. Captain, she said softly, even if you succeed, most of your people won't come home. The room fell silent. Lyra could see the truth of her words in their faces. They all knew the odds. They all understood what they were volunteering for. Ambassador, Dongmin said finally, may I ask you something? Of course. When your people first sent that distress call, what did you hope would happen? Lyra thought about it. I hoped someone would come. I hoped someone would help us. And when nobody answered, She paused, remembering those dark hours when it seemed like the entire galaxy had abandoned them. I despaired. I thought we would die alone and forgotten. Dongmin nodded. That's what we're fighting against. Not just the Draketh. We're fighting against the idea that people should face extinction alone. We're fighting for the idea that when someone calls for help, someone should answer, Engineer Sumin spoke up. My grandmother used to tell me a story. She said that in the darkest times, the smallest lights shine the brightest. Maybe that's what we are. Maybe we're just a small light, but sometimes a small light is enough. Sergeant. Taehyun's voice carried across the room. We didn't come here to be heroes, Ambassador. We came here because it was the right thing to do. If stopping the Draketh means we don't go home, then that's the price we pay. Lyra felt tears forming in her eyes. In all her years as a diplomat, she had never encountered anything like this. The great powers of the galaxy calculated everything in terms of profit and loss, risk and reward. These humans seemed to operate on completely different principles. Why? She whispered. Why are you willing to sacrifice everything for people? You barely know? Captain Dongmin looked at her with sad, gentle eyes. Because if we don't, who will? If we let the Draketh consume your people, then we're saying that some lives matter less than others. And once you start thinking that way, where does it end? Commander Hyejin activated the tactical display one more time. The operation begins in 6 hours. Ambassador, we'll need your people to coordinate the defense of Kasan while we're gone. Of course, Lyra said. But Captain, I want to go with you. The humans looked at her in surprise. Ambassador, Dongmin said, this is going to be extremely dangerous. I know. But this started as my people's fight. I won't sit safely behind while you risk everything to save us. General Torval stood up. If the ambassador goes, then I go too. One by one, other Valari officers volunteered to join the mission. Lyra watched as the humans accepted them into their ranks without hesitation, as if there had never been any question that they would fight together. As the meeting broke up and officers began preparing for the mission, Captain Dongmin pulled Lyra aside. Ambassador, he said quietly, I want you to know something. Even if this doesn't work, even if we fail, your people won't be forgotten. We'll make sure the galaxy remembers what happened here. Lyra looked into his eyes and saw something she had never seen in any of the great powers. absolute sincerity. "Thank you," she said. "For everything." Dongmin smiled. "Thank us when we get back." The journey into Draketh space was like traveling through hell itself. Ambassador Lyra Veltar stood on the bridge of the Soul's Pride, watching through the viewports as they passed the remains of what had once been thriving worlds. The first system they entered had been called Kepler's Garden by its human colonists. Now it was a gray wasteland. The Draketh had stripped away the atmosphere, consumed the oceans, and harvested every trace of organic matter. What remained was a dead rock floating in space. "How many people lived here?" Lyra asked quietly. Captain Dongmin's jaw was tight as he answered. 3 million. Mostly farmers and terraforming specialists. They sent a distress call 2 months ago. Did anyone respond? No one close enough to help. Commander Hyejin called out from her tactical station. "Captain, I'm reading massive bioship formations in the next system. Looks like they're building something big." The strike force had been fighting running battles for 3 days now. They had lost the destroyer Busan's hammer in the 4th system when it sacrificed itself to clear a path through a Draketh blockade. The frigate Incheon's light had stayed behind in the 7th system to delay pursuing swarms, buying the rest of the fleet precious time. Each loss hurt. Lyra had watched Captain Dongmin's face as those ships went silent on the communication channels. These were his people, his friends, and they were dying to save strangers. "Status report," Dongmin called out. Engineer Su Min looked up from her console, her face streaked with grease and exhaustion. "The quantum drives are holding but barely. I've had to reroute power from secondary systems just to keep us moving. We've got maybe 2 more jumps before we need major repairs." Lieutenant Jaewon's voice crackled over the communication system from his fighter. "Captain, my squadrons are down to 60% strength. The boys are tired, but they're still flying." Lyra marveled at how the humans kept going. They had been in constant combat for days, facing odds that would have broken any other military force. But they continued to fight with a determination that seemed almost supernatural. "Intelligence update," Intelligence Specialist So Young reported. "I'm detecting massive communication traffic ahead. We're getting close to something important." Through the viewport, Lyra could see the next system approaching. But this one was different from the dead worlds they had passed. This system pulsed, with alien life, biomechanical constructs that defied description. "My God," whispered General Torval, who had been standing silently beside her. "What is that?" The thing in the center of the system was enormous, easily the size of a small moon. It was covered in what looked like organic tissue, but shot through with metallic veins that pulsed with energy. Smaller bioships orbited around. "It like parasites around a host." "That's not a Draketh ship," Commander Hyejin said, studying her sensors. "It's something else entirely." Intelligence Specialist So Young's face had gone pale. "Captain, I'm reading the communication intercepts now. This isn't just a command node. This is the source. The Draketh aren't the real threat. They're just the beginning." Captain Dongmin turned to face her. "Explain." "The biomechanical construct is ancient. Millions of years old. It's been dormant, waiting. The Draketh are just its way of preparing the galaxy for consumption. They soften up the civilizations, consume the resources, and when everything is ready, it wakes up," Lyra finished, understanding, flooding through her. The massive construct was already showing signs of increased activity. Energy readings were spiking across its surface, and the bioships around it were moving in patterns that suggested preparation for something massive. "How long?" Dongmin asked. Based on the energy buildup, So-young calculated quickly, maybe 6 hours before it reaches full activity. Once that happens, nothing in the galaxy will be able to stop it. Lieutenant Yuna looked up from her communication. Station. Captain, we're receiving a transmission from the construct. It's trying to communicate with us. Put it through. The voice that came over the speakers was not really a voice at all. It was more like the whisper of cosmic wind, ancient and terrible and utterly alien. Small flesh things, it said. You have traveled far to witness your galaxy's perfection. Soon, all will be consumed. All will be unified. All will serve the eternal purpose. Captain Dongmin stepped forward. This is Captain Dongmin of the Terran vessel Soul's Pride. We've come to stop you. The alien presence seemed almost amused. Stop? You are insects. Your entire species has existed for mere moments compared to my eternal existence. I have consumed 1,000 galaxies. What can you possibly do to stop me? We can try. Dongmin replied simply. The construct's attention seemed to focus on him with sudden interest. Curious. Your thoughts are different. Most species beg for mercy when they realize the truth. Others offer to serve me in exchange for survival. But you speak of resistance even when you know you cannot win. That's what makes us human, Dongmin said. Lyra watched in amazement as her human friends prepared for what would certainly be their final battle. There was no way their small fleet could damage something the size of a moon. But they were going to try anyway. Engineer Su Min was working frantically at her station. Captain, I've got an idea. It's crazy and probably won't work, but it's the only chance we have. Talk to me. The construct is organic and mechanical, right? That means it has biological processes and technological systems. If we can overload our quantum drives at exactly the right frequency... You want to turn our ships into bombs, Commander Hyojin said. Basically, yes. But not just any bombs. Quantum disruption bombs. If we can get close enough to the construct's core and detonate our drives simultaneously, we might be able to cascade failure through its entire neural network. Captain Dongmin was quiet for a moment. What are the odds of success? Sumin hesitated. Maybe 10%. And that's if everything goes perfectly. And the odds of survival for the strike. Teams? 0. Lyra felt her heart sink. These brave humans had already sacrificed so much. Now they were talking about giving their lives in a desperate gamble that probably wouldn't even work. I'll do it, Dongmin said without hesitation. Captain, no, Commander Hyojin protested. Let me lead the strike. You need to survive to coordinate. The fleet! We all go! Lieutenant Jaewon's voice came over the communication system. This isn't something you do alone. One by one, the other human officers volunteered for the suicide mission. Even General Torval stepped forward, despite his injuries. Wait, Lyra said. There has to be another way. Captain Dongmin turned to her with sad, gentle eyes. Ambassador, sometimes there isn't another way. Sometimes you just have to do what's right, even when it costs everything. The construct's voice echoed through the ship again. Your species fascinates me, small flesh things. Even now, facing extinction, you choose to fight rather than surrender. Perhaps I will preserve some of you as curiosities when I consume your galaxy. You're not consuming anything, Dongmin replied. He turned to his crew. All ships, prepare for final assault. Target the construct's core. We go in fast, and we go in together. Captain, Lieutenant Yuna called out. I'm receiving. A transmission from Kasan. Sergeant Tae Hyun reports that the remaining Dracoth forces there have suddenly stopped their attacks. They're just standing still. Intelligence specialist. So Young looked up from her console. The construct is pulling energy from all Dracoth. Forces to power its awakening. If we can disrupt it now, while it's drawing on its entire network, the cascade failure will spread to every Dracoth force in the galaxy, Engineer Sumin finished. Captain, this might actually work. Captain Dong-min looked around at his crew, his friends, his family. All ships. This is Seoul's pride. We came here to save the Valari. We stayed to save the galaxy. Whatever happens next, remember that we answered the call when no one else would. Lyra watched through the viewport as the human ships accelerated toward the massive construct. They looked so small against that ancient horror, like fireflies attacking a mountain. But sometimes, she thought, the smallest lights shine brightest. In the darkest places, the final battle was about to begin. The ancient construct loomed before them like a nightmare made real. Ambassador Lyra Veltar gripped the railing on the bridge of the Soul's Pride as the ship shuddered under enemy fire. Biomechanical weapons unlike anything in the Galactic. Databases tore through space around them. Shields at 30%. Engineer Sumin called out, her voice steady despite the chaos. Hull breaches on decks 4 and 7. Captain Dong-min stood at the center of the bridge, his face calm even as explosions rocked the ship. All fighters, continue your attack runs on the construct's defense nodes. We need to clear a path to the core. Lieutenant Jae-won's voice crackled over the communication system from somewhere in the battle. Copy that, Captain. We're taking heavy losses, but we're getting through. Through the viewport, Lyra could see the human fighters darting between massive bioships like angry insects. The pilots flew with a skill and courage that defied belief, weaving through defensive fire that would have destroyed any other species. Aircraft. But it wasn't enough. The construct was simply too large, too powerful. For every defense node they destroyed, 2 more seemed to take its place. Captain, Intelligence Specialist So Young reported, the construct's energy output is increasing. It's almost fully awakened. The alien voice echoed through the ship again, ancient and terrible. You have fought well, small flesh things. But this ends now. Behold the power that has consumed 1,000 galaxies. The construct's surface began to glow with energy that hurt to look at directly. Weapons beyond imagination emerged from its biomechanical skin, targeting the human fleet with devastating precision. The cruiser Daigu's Honor exploded in a ball of plasma. The frigate Gwangju's Hope simply vanished, torn apart by forces that shouldn't exist. In seconds, half the human fleet was gone. All remaining ships, Captain Dong-min's voice was steady even as his fleet died around him. Continue the attack. We're not here to survive. We're here to win. Commander Hyojin looked up from her tactical station, tears streaming down her face. Captain, we've lost contact with 6 ships. The others are heavily damaged. Status of the quantum drives? Engineer. Sumin checked her readings. Still stable, but barely. If we're going to do this, it has to be now. Lyra watched in amazement as the surviving human ships formed up for their final attack. They were outnumbered 1,000 to 1, facing a creature that had destroyed entire galaxies, and they were still fighting. Captain, she said quietly, let me go with you. Dongmin turned to her. Ambassador, someone needs to survive to tell this story. And someone needs to represent my people in this final moment, she replied. We started this together. We should finish it together. General Torval stepped forward despite his injuries. The ambassador is right. If this is humanity's final stand, then it's our final stand too. Captain Dongmin looked at them for a moment, then nodded. All right, but when we get close to the core, you transfer to an escape pod. Someone has to tell the galaxy what happened here. The Soul's Pride and the 3 remaining human ships began their final approach. The construct's defenses focused on them like the attention of an angry god. Energy beams that could crack planets struck their shields. Biomechanical weapons that defied physics tore at their hulls. Shields failing, Sumin reported. Hull integrity at critical levels. Keep going, Dongmin ordered. We're almost there. Through the viewport, Lyra could see the construct's core now. It pulsed with energy that seemed to come from the heart of creation itself. This was the center of the ancient machine's power, the source of its terrible intelligence. Range to target core 5,000 kilometers, Lieutenant Yuno reported. 4,000, 3,000. The construct's voice boomed through space, no longer amused but genuinely angry. Impossible! You cannot reach the core. No species has ever... We're not like other species, Captain Dongmin replied calmly. 2,000 kilometers. All ships. The captain's voice echoed through the communication system. Prepare for quantum drive overload. It's been an honor, serving with you all. The responses came back immediately. Honor's been ours, Captain. That was Commander Lee from the destroyer Ulsan's Fury. See you on the other side, sir. Captain Park from the frigate Jeju's Wind, for Earth and the Galaxy. Lieutenant Commander Kim from the cruiser. Pohang's Thunder. Lyra felt tears streaming down her face as she listened to these brave people say goodbye. They were so young, so full of life, and they were about to give it all away for people they had never met. 1,000 kilometers. Ambassador, Captain Dongmin turned to her. Time to go. No, Lyra said firmly. I'm staying. Lyra, you have to survive. Someone has to tell... Someone will, she interrupted. General Torval, get to the escape pod. Tell the galaxy what humanity did here. The general looked like he wanted to argue, but Lyra's expression stopped him. I will, Ambassador. I promise. As Torval left the bridge, the ship shook under a massive impact. Through the viewport, Lyra could see they were almost at the construct's core. The energy there was so intense, it was like looking into a star. Foss. 100 kilometers! Quantum drive's ready, Engineer Suman called out. All ships report ready for overload. Do it, Captain Dongmin ordered. What happened next defied description. The quantum drives of 4 human ships overloaded simultaneously, creating a cascade of energy that tore through the fabric of space itself. The construct's core, designed to channel and control vast amounts of power, suddenly found itself overwhelmed by forces it couldn't absorb or redirect. The ancient machine's scream echoed across the galaxy as its neural network began to collapse. The energy cascade spread through its biomechanical body like a virus, shutting down systems that had operated for millions of years. Lyra felt the soul's pride breaking apart around her. Through the chaos, she could hear Captain Dongmin's voice one last time. This is for everyone who ever called for help and got no answer. This is for everyone who thought they were alone in the dark. Then the ship exploded. But something impossible happened. As the soul's pride died, General Torval's escape pod was caught in the explosion's shock wave and thrown clear of the construct. By pure chance, he survived to witness what followed. The construct's death throes were visible across the galaxy. As its neural network collapsed, every Dracoth force connected to it simply stopped functioning. On Kesan, Sergeant Tai Hyun watched in amazement as the Dracoth invaders collapsed where they stood, their connection to the hive mind severed forever. Across dozens of star systems, Dracoth fleets lost coordination and began to drift aimlessly. Some self-destructed as their biomechanical components failed. Others simply shut down, becoming derelict hulks floating in space. The threat that had consumed 57 star systems and threatened the entire galaxy was ended in a moment by 17 human ships and their crews. General Torval's pod was eventually picked up by a Valari rescue ship. He was the only survivor of the final battle, the only witness to humanity's ultimate sacrifice. 3 months later, he stood before the Galactic Council, reading the names of human heroes into the official record. The same civilizations that had ignored the Valari's pleas now offered condolences and praise for humanity's sacrifice. Captain Dongmin of the Soul's Pride, Torval read, his voice carrying across the great assembly. Commander Hyejin, Tactical Officer. Lieutenant Jaewon, Fighter Pilot. Engineer Su Min, Intelligence Specialist So Young. Lieutenant Yuna, Communications. Sergeant Tai Hyun, Marine Commander. The list went on and on. 437 names. 437 humans who had answered a call for help from strangers and paid the ultimate price. The humans asked for nothing in return, Torval continued. They came because we called for help. They fought because it was right. They died because someone had to stand against the darkness. The Zephyrian Empire offered trade agreements. The Crystalline Consortium proposed technology exchanges. The hegemony of Arcturus suggested military cooperation, but the human representative, a young woman named Commander Hyejin, who had somehow survived the battle for Kasan, gave a simple response. Next time someone calls for help, don't make them. Wait for an answer. Later, as delegates filed out of the council chambers, the Valari ambassador found Commander Hyejin standing alone before a memorial wall that now bore the names of the fallen. They saved us all, the ambassador said quietly. They saved more than that, Hyejin replied. They saved the idea that people shouldn't face the darkness alone. They proved that when someone calls for help, someone should answer. The ambassador looked at the names on the wall. So many young lives, ended too soon. Was it worth it? Commander Hyejin was quiet for a long moment. Ask me in 100 years, when children on a dozen worlds grow up free because of what they did. Ask me when. The next crisis comes and the galaxy remembers that the right thing to do is help, not hide. She touched one name on the wall, Captain Dongmin. They knew they probably wouldn't come home, but they came anyway. That's what made them heroes. Not that they won, but that they tried when no one else would. The memorial wall stood in the heart of the Galactic Council chambers, a reminder that sometimes the smallest light shines brightest in the darkest hour, and that when someone calls for help, someone should always answer.